going on, everyone? So I wanted to make a kind of a companion video to the Enema of the State Helix tone patch video that I did. I know I've done a bunch of these kind of Enema of the State tone videos. People seem to like them, which is cool because it's fun to do. But I kind of took a new approach to it. I got the new 2023 Tom Delonge Strat. I thought it'd be fun to make a patch with this, although I will say that I've shot this out with my actual 2001 original one, and I've shot it out with a Squire that I had back in the day that I put a Seymour Duncan Invader in, and they all kind of sound the same, to be honest. Also, sorry for the light glare. The Invader with gain kind of does its own thing, but that's also going to differ on the tones you dial in. So I made a new patch. I was inspired by a lot of different things. Tom rejoined Blink. We had the North American tour, which was a lot of fun. I got to go both Chicago nights. New album and song should be dropping any day now, and I know people are super anxious and mad it hasn't come out, but I'm just kind of like chilling, like, hey, when it comes out, cool. The guitar got a reissue, which is sweet, and I think we're getting a Stratocaster based on that pink, the shell pink one with the black hardware and the dot inlays that he posted, where he's like, I can see the future or whatever. I know there's a lot more channels that do Blink gear videos a lot better than I do because that's not really my forte. I'm interested in them. I'm pretty dialed in on what he used, but I'm not 100%. So if I misspeak, I apologize. I know like the 182 gear channel and like guys like that, they're like really awesome with that stuff. But I'm just hyped on, you know, getting another one of these since they, the old one, or the original one, I guess, was like the guitar that I wanted to basically, you know, kick off my, what I enjoy doing, playing music, writing music, playing in bands, whatever. Also, sorry I can't really see the guitar well in this video. That's kind of not what it's about. And anything I do is like a tone sample, and this is really just my monitors getting picked up by the camera. This is more of like a talking video. If you want to check out the tones, I can link the other video that's no talking, all playing. Anyways, I made this Line 6 Helix tone patch available for free on Line 6 Custom Tone, and it's just called Blink 1999, and it'll be by Mil182, and you'll see all the details in it. If you don't have Helix, or you just want to kind of get an idea of what I used if you like the sound, I'm going to break down my approach to what I dialed in, what you can kind of do to get in the ballpark, and just kind of talk about like some of the stuff that's been starting to get uncovered. What drives me crazy about Blink being my favorite band is that they never do like reissues, remasters, not a lot of history stuff, you know, and that's okay. The albums, all the Jerry Finn stuff, may he rest in peace, still holds up, sounds amazing, like, don't get me wrong. The book by Ann Hoppus is probably one of the most notable documents of Blink history, regardless of, you know, the accuracies or what's maybe missing in the gaps in time. It's really great, but there's just not a ton of information about the studio sessions up until 2003 when they were recording it for the MTV thing and all the Cheetah videos online. Now, I know a lot of information has come out thanks to people like David Jones and then the 182 Gear guys. All those channels are awesome. Like, check that out if you want to know about Tom's gear. I think that I know a good amount of it, but again, who am I? Like, I might be wrong. So I'm not trying to claim to document everything he actually used. I just kind of try to use my ears, study what people know and the information they're willing to share, and then try to find photos and just different things because I'm interested in all kind of tones. But a lot of my other favorite bands, they'll do like really cool like reissues of stuff, and you get to see pictures of what's going on in the studio, and they'll talk about the gear, and it almost feels like Tom either doesn't want to tell you or just doesn't remember. Maybe he doesn't care. I mean, to be honest, like, even though we, like a lot of us fans, obsess over what he uses, it doesn't seem like he really cares that much, as long as it kind of serves the purpose it needs to as a tool. You know, using the Axe effects, he's got the Duncan, I think it's just a Duncan Custom, like an SH5 now, which is a great pickup, but it's more in line with something like a JB where it can be hot, but it's more of like a regular, like, up the middle rock pickup. And that's because with things like Helix, you don't need to drive an amp. You can kind of shape your tone more. You don't need an Invader. And I'm sure that he like was used to the Dirty Fingers, but the Dirty Fingers, as hot as it is, it's different than the Invader. It doesn't have the bottom end that the Invader does, at least in my experience with it in a few different guitars. I've come across a lot of pictures It's hard to say what's real and what's not. Obviously, there's a lot of pictures circulating that if you're watching this, you may have seen Tom playing the telly in the Enema sessions. It's like the butterscotch blonde one, just like a traditional one. That was probably Jerry Finn's. There's like a mystery Strat, which I think I know which one it is, but that's just my opinion. But he's kind of holding it like this, and you can see it's a bolt-on neck, so we know it's, even if it's telly, we know it's not the Telly Customs that Jerry Finn had, where they're like basically Les Pauls with P90s, but they're Telly bodies. Sorry, Telly Juniors, not Telly Customs. Different, but you probably know what I mean. And, you know, there's been rumored that he used this PRS and all this different stuff. But for the sake of this, I use the new Tom DeLonge Strat because most people who are into this kind of stuff are probably using something comparable. It might be the 2001 version, it might be a Squire, it might be this one, it might be one that you built from Warmoth or from Fender. It could be just a guitar you threw an Invader in, or it could be something that's just a guitar with a high output humbucker in the bridge. I don't expect, if you're chasing after these kind of punk rock tones, to specifically go after other guitars that may be more studio tools. And if you have those things, that's great, because like P90s and the Telly sound rad. I have a PRS SE 2408, custom 2408. I really like it. I've been using it in the studio recently for some of my solo stuff. But again, I'm just using this as just kind of a baseline. It is Tom's signature guitar, so good place to start. And then there's been some pictures, which I don't know. I know some of them are real because you could see Mark or Tom or Mark's posted them. I don't know where all of them came from, but I've seen some of the amp setups, and there's like Fender combos, and there's Marshall cabs, and Tom's Mesa cab, Tom's or triple rectifier, sorry. Um, the latter one that he had covered in kind of like that snakeskinish print with like the tan. Um, Not the alien head one from like Dude Ranch. And then the Marshall 900 where he had like an alien design too over the Marshall logo, but he live he would turn it backwards. That's the one that said aliens exist on the back on the gold like metal cover. I've been told by some people, which I don't disagree with this. I can kind of hear it that on Jacket, which sounds very similar, they moved towards one of the like old, like it was like a Rev G or something, like one of the older Mesa dual rectifiers that came out, probably like a blackface one, and the silver Jubilee Marshall head, which those are outstanding. They're really great. They're just a little different. They're somewhere between the 8 and the 900, and that's something I'm looking to add to my collection. So heads up, those are great if you come across one. And it kind of, again, it's all frequency, right? It's all high end, low end, but it's mid range instrument and where you want it in the mix. And Jerry Finn was a master at that. Compression, EQ, all that stuff's important. And then, you know, Jerry Finn also had a white Marshall Plexi, which you can see it all over the 2003, the Untitled videos. And I showed pictures of that in my video for that. But he had that, it's basically an exact replica of the amp they used for Doogie, for Green Day. And I'm not sure how much that head got used, but I think the cab did, because he was blending cabs and speakers and using different EQs and compressions. And something Jerry Finn was known for was getting guitar players dialed in before he tracked them, so they're feeling it, they're playing to a feel and a sound, and it wasn't going to get manipulated too much later. Obviously, you have to do your mixing, you have to do your mastering, but he wasn't the kind of guy who nowadays, obviously this wasn't really a thing back then, but nowadays it's like reamp, reamp, reamp. And it's crazy because, you know, I've been recording since probably 2007 or 8, and I've kind of started when that was becoming the thing around 2010. It was like everybody was wanting to start doing it. 11, 12. Now, I mean, you know, I haven't done an album or an EP or even a single where I don't have DI guitars, and then they blunt. It's crazy. It's so different. But this tone was really him kind of getting the best blend of everything and EQing it the right way for the mix, and he knew what he wanted to hear in the end, and it's great. So where I started with this patch, I have two individual paths. First path is the guitar direct in, and at the end is panned hard left, and the second path is the guitar direct in, panned hard right. At the end of it, it is a mono track, but the way that they come out is stereo on a mono track, so it's basically just blending them. There's a lot of things you can do in Helix. There's a lot of people who make awesome videos on different routing and different things, and I watch a lot of them, but I try not to overcomplicate it, because at the end of the day, if you can get a great sound with less, that's the way to go for me. I don't want to have to put in too much. So I'm just going to break down each path and what I did, and I'll kind of show the examples of why I did it. So the main thing with this tone is you want the individual notes, the riffs, to ring out and have a nice distorted sound. It's a very Descendants approach to riff writing, which is fantastic and sounds great, and a lot of Tom's most classic riffs are kind of in that vein. When you get to the chorus and you're playing these kind of strummed out power chords, distorted, you want them to still have that kind of similar distorted sound. You still want to be able to hear the full chord, but it has kind of a modern rock sound. This is 1999 after all, so everybody's using dual rectifiers and triple rectifiers, right? But the key here is when you're palm muting, you're cleaning it up. And it doesn't sound super distorted. It has a nice power behind it, so it's not fickle and thin and sounds like a clean guitar, but it doesn't have that kind of grindy, overly distorted, shrill high end that like some like really high gain metal tones can have. And I talked about this in some videos I did a few years ago, how Tom's right hand was very precise. Obviously live they would play super sloppy and like people would be like, oh, they suck, and maybe they're drinking a lot and whatever. But I'm talking about the studio, like they were really clean. They're really clean mutes, you know? The more you choke up, the more genty you're gonna get. But that's kind of the idea there. And when I made this patch, I didn't do any snapshots where it's like, I could have did like a clean tone with a little bit of chorus for like the What's My Age Again bridge, or like some flange for the Going Away to College intro or whatever. And I could make those patches if you guys want me to, I totally will. But this whole idea was, hey, how can I play Enema of the State? It was just like the regular, like what's the main tone? And the approach I did, in the first path, we have a noise gate, which to me is kind of mandatory when you're using these kind of pickups and high gain, because if you turn it off, that's what you get. I don't know if you guys can hear that on the camera, but it's just hiss. Sounds like my 5150. Then I have a compressor, which I use the Kinky Comp, which is a it's based off the Exotic compressor, like really small one that looks like the EP booster, but it's the compressor. It works in a way where it shapes the feel more than anything. Obviously you can get it to make different tones sound different, but it really gives you more of a feel and can kind of really liven up the actual patches you're using, so they're not so like digital and, you know, for lack of a better term, fake sounding. I think Helix can sound really, really, really good, but it can also sound like anything. It can sound really bad. So I use a little bit of compression there, and I kind of just have it all the way up the middle on whatever the bass settings are. I think I only have the attack on like 2, level at half, sensitivity at half, mix is all the way up, release is at 10. Like, I didn't mess with it too much just because it felt good where it was at. From there, we have 3 more things on this path. We have a distortion patch, which is just an overdrive, and I'll get to that. The amp head itself, the cabinet, which is 2 cabinets, and the microphones, of course, and then an EQ. So I want to talk about the amp first, but the distortion patch obviously goes in front of the amp. The first amp I have here is a Line 6 2204 mod, which the Line 6 2204 is the line. So Line 6 has like these original patches they make, but the 2204, the original version of it in there, is based off of Marshall JCM 800. This is based off a modded Marshall JCM 800, so those are a little bit hotter. And I kind of used that in place of a 900 since they don't really have a 900, and dialed it in with just drive at 2, bass at 4, the mid at 7/4, treble at 6/9, presence at 5, and then like the volumes you kind of have to vary. I have them, if you download the patch you'll see they're pretty high, but that's just because I was trying to get it level with the track in my DAW. The thing with this is when you're doing album tones, you got to cut the low end. I mean, if you had isolated guitar tracks from any of your favorite albums, you're going to see that most of the time there's not very much bass in the mix, and that's because that's for your bass guitar and your kick drum. I know most of you probably know that already, but I have to say that because people will hear these patches isolated and be like, well, that doesn't sound how I want it to sound. Well, if you're playing in your bedroom, yeah, you want to turn the bass up if you're not playing with a track. It's gonna sound different, but like this is in the context of a mix, and I was shooting it out with the album track, so that's why there's not a ton of bass. Again, I have the drive at 2. This is already a little bit hotter than the regular 800 patch, and I have a distortion patch in front of it, and I'm blending it with another head. I didn't want it to be any hotter than it already is, because if I started palm muting and you turn it up, you know, here it is at 5. It's already too much. And then you choke up, it's real genty. The cabinet setup I decided to use here is the dual cabinet setup. So I used to really only use IRs that I bought from like really, you know, well-known different places like ML Sound Lab and Own Hammer, and I have some of Tone Junkies and whatever, and they're all great. But you know, the cabs I use, and most of the time in my actual like bands and stuff, I have a couple of Mesa standard size rectifier cabs of V30s, and I also have an open back orange 212 of V30s for like some of the lighter stuff I do. I'm not saying V30s are the only good speaker, that's just kind of what I tend to use, and I wanted stuff that sounded and reacted how it would with my actual cabs. But when Line 6 overhauled their cabinet IR stuff, it's so much better now, and there you have more control, I feel like. So I really like these, and I felt like if you're going to download this, it didn't require an IR. I'm not at the point where I'm making my own IRs yet. I might get there eventually, but I'm just not like a cabinet guy where I want to have 5,000 of them. Like, I think that they're awesome, and they're probably one of the most important things in your whole setup, but I don't need too many more than what I already have. So I'm like, I'm into the IRs. I have a 412 Cali V30, which is the Mesa cab, and it has a 47 condenser FET mic on it, and it's pretty much stock settings because, again, I didn't want to mess with it too much. I thought it sounded good. And then I have, for the other one, the 412 Brit V30, which is the Marshall with the V30s in it, and a 67 condenser mic. Okay, so before the amp in the cabinet, I'm going backwards here, I put a deranged master. That's the distortion patch, but it's not a distortion pedal. This is based off the Dallas Rangemaster, vintage studio tool, kind of a treble boost, kind of brightens things up. I've never used a real one in person. I've watched videos on them and stuff, but I like what this thing does. It livens things up a little bit. It makes them a little bit brighter, and it gets me to where that JCM 900 tone is, because I've played and heard a billion actual JCM 900s. The era that I grew up in playing guitar, the 2000 was new, so like everybody was getting 900s cheap. I had buddies that still have them, and I think they're awesome. I'd love to get one. The 50 watts are amazing. The 100 watts still really good. It's just I feel like these days people are backing off on the wattage, and the 50 watt is a nice place to be. But they're great. And this kind of gets you in that range. And a lot of people hate on them. They like the 800s way better, and I get that. But for me, like the type of stuff I like, maybe it's just the era I grew up in. So I got this thing with the drive at 2.5, maybe 2.6, bass at 4.1, treble at 8.5, and then the level is just set at 0 dB boost, so just no boost. And it really just gives it a little bit more of an edge and a little bit brighter of a sound. So like without it, with it. And that was still with it on the other path because I didn't turn that path off. So if I turn both of them off, way more low end, turn them both back on. Now again, this is my camera speaker. It's not going to sound great. It's just a demo and an example for you. So yeah, there's not an actual like drive patch on there because I don't think that they were using drives. Maybe, you know, like I know that like Jerry Finn had a bunch of cool ones. I think he had like the Red Llama and like all this kind of cool 90s way huge stuff. And I'm sure he had like, you know, different overdrives. And I love overdrive pedals. Sitting at my feet right now, I have a Noble's ODR1. I have a Blues Driver down there. I have a Conspiracy Theory, which is a clone. I have a bunch of them. I love them, but I just don't think it's necessary here. Like, for as much as I've used them and for other stuff that I try to dial in, I really think they just need to brighten it up a little bit, because a lot of the tightening up comes from cutting the bottom end and just compression. And then one of the most important things at the end is just the EQ. So I have the low-high shelf EQ in there, and really I'm just cutting low frequency, cutting high frequency subtly, but just keeping it at a place where the mid can come out and fill that space it's supposed to fill. Okay, so on the other path, really the main difference is the amp. The noise gate's the same, compressor's the same, range master's the same. I even have the same cabinet set up, and the EQ at the end is the same. The amp here, Cali rectifier, go figure, right? So I think this is just supposed to be a dual rectifier. Dual rectifiers in these types of settings, be it like the Helix, the Axe Effects, any of these, you know, the one-off like amp sims people make, they're so hit or miss. Sometimes they're just dependent on how you dial them in. Mesas are kind of weird. They can be great, but I mostly have heard them sound really bad when I go watch bands play that aren't like at a pro level. And people used to ask me, and I'm no like tone like genius, but people are like, well, why does yours, you know, how do you get that sound? And I'm just like, well, Mesas are really bassy, so maybe lay off on all the low end and maybe like, you know, keep your mids up. I know people want that scoop sound, but like in a live room setting, you have to have those mids. So with the settings on the rectifier sim, I have the drive at 4.3. So it's almost halfway, but not quite. And that's because, again, with the muting, if you get too much gain on there, it's gonna sound like a weird shrill distortion. But also with the Mesa, the settings, you have to make sure that you cut the bass, because otherwise it sounds flubby and clean and weird. So I have the bass down at 2.6, the mid at 5.9, and the treble at 7.9. Presence at 2. Again, presence is weird, and I don't like going over half most of the time. Channel volume, master volume, again, that's kind of dependent on where you're at in the DAW. I have them at like 6.7 and 5.7 just because that's where it sit nice when I was shooting it out with the track. But yeah, and then everything else is the same. So it's really just two of the same paths, and I have the Marshall head and the Mesa head. And I took this approach because everybody likes to think of Tom using those amps and this guitar, and even if that's not exactly what it used, I think I got pretty close by just trying to use my earring. And again, it's dependent on, I'm using Rocket KRK5 monitors, the room that I'm in, where my little mini home studio setup is in a small room, and it's bouncing off walls, and it's probably not acoustically treated anywhere nearly as good as it should be, if at all. But I use the headphones sometimes, but I don't really like doing that. This is just a fun patch I made for myself, and I wanted to share it with anybody who was interested in it, so that way you can kind of get a baseline for where to start. And the reason I wanted to do the video explaining it was because if you're trying to make your own sounds with your own amp or your own amp sims or whatever, you can kind of get an idea of how I approached it. So you want enough distortion is the main thing for the notes to ring out and the chords to ring out. But when you palm mute, you don't want it to be overly distorted. Mid-range is important. Again, if you're playing along to the record, cutting the bass, the low end is important, even if it's just by a little bit. Treble, while I don't like having too much high end, and again, I EQ a lot of it out at certain frequencies, that's getting specific to where it shouldn't be. The basic treble on your amp is probably going to be a little bit higher because of a few reasons. Number one, the general tone that they go for. Number two, this pickup. If you're using this pickup, it's going to have a lot of low end. You may need to cut back on the treble and add some bass if you're using a pickup that has more high end. If you're using like an X2N, for example, that has some high end to it and it can get shrill. If you're using a Dirty Fingers, if you're using just really anything that has more high end, it doesn't have to be a Tom Delonge related pickup. And again, this isn't for the cleans, and I'm not really getting into the minutia here. I'm just really trying to give a basic example of what I use. I might do some covers just to give an example. And again, you may disagree with me. That's totally fine. Like if you think that this doesn't sound anything close or you just don't like it, that's okay. This is just for me to have fun with, and I wanted to share it for anybody else who might like it. If you have any questions or you want me to take a stab at any other tones, I'm willing to. I'm starting to dive into other bands' tones because I like building these patches and trying to get in the ballpark. So hopefully anybody who downloaded this is having fun with it. Feel free to tweak it to your taste, add, subtract, do what you want to do with it. It's really not meant to be the final be all end all. It's just me having fun and saying, hey, like, here's something that's cool that you might enjoy. So if you like it, thanks so much. Thanks for checking out the video, and I hope to make some more of these very soon. Peace.